Hello and welcome to the Navy Blue Corner. I'm Ian, joined as always by my good mate Lockie, and we are back for our last episode of the year to recap the draft and to put a nice little bow on the year as the excitement builds towards the 2025 season. And Lockie, it's been about a month since we last caught up and spoke about Carlton. So
That's
firstly, how have you been? And after pretty much finalizing the list for next season, how excited are you for 2025?
Bloody excited, mate. As you said before we jumped on, like the itchiness is starting to return. I feel like we've had our little break. There seems to be less and less of a break as well, by the way. It's pretty much just like the season ends and there's content all the way up until March, which we love. But I'm excited to chat to you and wrap all this up for this year.
No, I agree. I think even though we were doing a lot of content for the trade period and the draft, I was expecting my feelings to start to dip. But weirdly, as soon as that draft had concluded, all I wanted was for us to start playing games again, see the whole new team, see these kids be able to run out there, some preseason games. So, yeah, I'm dreading this summer break that is about to hit us where there's absolutely nothing for about a month and a half. But that's what this episode is for, so we can recap everything, get excited, and build towards next season. So let's start at the draft recap. Lockie, the draft happened. We brought in everyone. We had some very big draft previews where I threw out a lot of names. Lucky, seems like most of those ended up coming our way. After giving you a bit of a synopsis on the players beforehand, what did you think of who we ended up drafting?
Yeah, it felt like a really successful draft period for us. I felt it didn't feel like we could really go wrong right at the top end. We prayed that Ben would get past pick 40 so we could get another quality guy in, which happened. So, it felt like everything went perfectly. I think a lot of people had different ideas of where they wanted us to go with pick 3 based on the different levels of information that they had. So that's a fun thing about this period, I think, for us that we talked about. It was so nice being up that pointy end and to know that we could get one of the top guys. So it's so great that we did.
Yeah, so Jagga Smith is who we selected with pick 3. What were your thoughts on that one, Lockie?
Yeah, it's one where I feel like a lot of Carlton people weren't really focusing on him before the draft. And so it took a bit of kind of like talking myself into it after the pick because I'd kind of focused on some of the other guys that we'd looked at. But like I thought his maturity through the way that he spoke throughout the whole draft period really stood out as like a future leader and, clearly a really switched on kid. And then the highlights kind of spoke for themselves.
Yeah, he really wasn't a name that was linked to us until really a week before the draft or the week of the draft. All of a sudden it was Carlton said it's Jagga. And from that moment on, everything was, I think Carlton are trying to get Jagga Smith instead of a Sid Draper or Finn O'Sullivan that a lot of us expected. I know that's where I put a lot of my effort into because initially, and for anyone that watched the draft preview, looking at the traits in particular that our midfield didn't have, there was a lot of players around that pointy end that really suited that. Whereas I think I said in the preview, Jagga Smith was to a degree kind of a few things that we do already have at the club. And that's why I was maybe a little bit more excited for the prospect of a Sid Draper, someone who just had this electric pace, which our midfield clearly doesn't have. But I mean, I maybe didn't stress this enough at the time, saying that this was really just a no-lose situation. Whoever was going to be available was an amazing selection. Whoever we got out of that top 4 or 5 were going to be a really top player that we have not had access to in quite some time. And I think regardless of our own preferences, it was exciting to hear that Carlton and Nick Austin said he was their number 1 rated player. Can you take them at face value for that? Are they going to say that about whoever they drafted? But I think for me, for most of this year, he was the number 1 player. His season was the most consistent out of anyone. He was the most well put together prospect all year. It does not surprise me that he was the number 1. He was pretty much the best player in the draft. I think still, if his all-round capabilities, he was the safest selection there. And I'm like you, I was so blown away hearing him speak that as soon as I heard all that content, I just went, yeah, it makes sense why we went this guy. He just carried himself so much more maturely compared to every other draftee. He feels like that guy that can just come in straight away and be at that level because of how he carries himself. And I think that was the thing that really impressed me more than anything else.
And the club spoke, like, had that narrative about that it isn't just for the now and it is for the future too. And like, I don't know, I was trying to think back to when I felt like this about one of our top picks. Like, to me, he genuinely already gives future captain energy.
Yeah.
Like, you can just see that in his path. And it's not to say that Draper isn't like that too. Like, he impressed me as well with his kind of the way that he speaks and leadership as well. But yeah, for Jagga, that path feels so clear, which is, it's a beautiful thing that we can do this. When you look back at our last 5 years of drafting, we haven't, I guess, at least to me, brought in that person where it's like, oh, wow, this is someone that genuinely will be a star for us their whole career.
Yeah, and that was going to be the really, I think, interesting thing as well, looking at who we were going to potentially bring in, was do we go Draper, who maybe isn't as good as Jagga Smith, but fits more of an obvious need for us? Or do we get someone who, look, he's still got some pace to him. It's not like he's slower. I feel like all the emphasis was put on other players, and now everyone thinks we've drafted a really slow inside midfielder. That's not what Jagga Smith is at all. But it was this, do we go the speed that is just ridiculous from a Draper? Do we go the more well-rounded player that's probably better? And that was going to be the interesting thing. Ultimately, they go Jagga Smith, and it just feels like the much less risky prospect to go. And if you're looking at a guy in our midfield, like Adam Cher at the moment, seems to be doing amazingly in preseason, but still has those hamstring issues. We know Walsh has had some back issues. Kind of does make a bit more sense to just go the simple option of someone who probably is the best player in the draft, rather than Draper was always that fourth, fifth kind of guy. He wasn't in that top bracket, whereas Lawler, Draper, Foss, they were all guys that were potential pick one. No one was really saying Draper could be that. So it really makes sense in the end why they went with a Jagga Smith. And for those that don't know much about him, he is just so clean. He's one of the cleanest sort of prospects I think I've seen in a long time. Massive accumulator, gets 30, 40 disposals anytime he goes out there, even at VFL level, playing against adults. His stats did not drop at all. He was continually racking up those possessions. And I think the biggest question that's been leveled around him since we drafted him anyway is he fast? Does he have speed? Because that's what our midfield lacks. And I tried to find some draft combine stats to compare him, because I always thought he was quite similar to a Walshy with a lot of his attributes. Maybe why I was down on him a little bit, thinking, do you just bring in a similar-ish player or do you get something else? But comparing their draft combines, he got basically the exact same time in the 20-meter sprint as Walsh, and he was 20 seconds slower than Walshy in his 2K time trial, which is absolutely nothing in the grand scheme of things. So speed-wise, very similar to Walshy. What he does have, though, maybe slightly compared to Walshy, is he's just such a quicker step out of congestion, which if anyone's seen, Jagga Smith play in his under-18 footy, you'll notice all his highlights, everything is just gets the ball, quick turn out of trouble, hands off, gets that kick out. And that creativity is maybe another element of something we don't have with an accumulator. We know what Walsh can do. We know what Chera can do, but Jagga just does it in a slightly different way. And where I've probably started to think in how he can fit into our midfield is something we've probably spoken about a little bit in different ways. One, how do we get more out of Walsh and Chera?
Yes.
And is that by getting someone else who can do more of that dirty work, extract it out, but do it in a better way where they've got more time and space in our midfield? Last season, how often were we fumbly? Were we struggling to get that first possession out to those runners? We couldn't get it happening for us. So does a guy like Jagga Smith allow Walshy and Chera to get better? And also, you at last year's sort of preseason, you were highlighting a guy like George Hewitt, saying, we love him, we love what he can bring, but can we go a step further than George Hewitt? Is there someone else that can bring what he does, but add something else? And this is where maybe long-term we could see that, where Jagga Smith he's not that big body. We know he's got that slight frame, but he still wins so much of the football and extracts it out by hand. If he can do that and do that grunt work like a George Hewitt does, but be more creative, be more attacking than a Hewitt, which I think he is, well, then how much does that just elevate our midfield by giving something different and taking us to that next level of Cripps being that inside mid that just wins the ball, Jagga doing that, and then Walsh and Chera all of a sudden don't have to be that ball winner as much. I think it's really exciting and just something that can improve not just the midfield by his personal game, but actually elevating everyone else around him. And that's probably where I've started to see it more in what he would bring, that a guy like Draper probably wouldn't be able to elevate those around us. He'd just be another different piece of that midfield.
No, it's a fantastic summary. I was thinking very similarly in terms of that unlocking Walsh and Chera to do something a bit different. And particularly Walsh, like a role for him that has changed over the years for different reasons. And how could Jagga unlock something different there, which is great. And I guess the big question then on everyone's kind of lips, and especially mine, and as I'm trying to think of my best 23 for next year, like, do you see one, could you see us playing Jagga not in a centre square role early days, as we've seen for some other guys like Dacos, or do you think that he's just a midfielder? And then kind of two, do you think that, like, will he be there round one?
Yeah, look, his skills are good, don't get me wrong, but I wouldn't say he's as silky as a guy like Dacos with ball in hand, which is why he probably made so much sense starting off the halfback, because he just one of the best beautiful kicks in the draft. Jagga's good with skills, which is also another reason why I do like him. It's just so well-rounded, everything he's good at, and he seemed to keep improving his foot skills as the season progressed as well. But I'm not sure there's another role for him. Could he potentially be, that high half forward pinch hitting potentially with his slight frame? But I mean, when I watched him play in the VFL and he just dominated in the midfield, it feels like he can just do that at AFL level, even though he is a little bit smaller sort of frame-wise. I don't see him playing another position, but I don't think that's a bad thing. I think he can come straight into this midfield and impact it. To what level? That'll be really interesting. I'll kind of maybe have to see him at some preseason trainings before I can get a real glimpse of just where he's at, but I'd be shocked if he doesn't walk straight into this 23. Just from everything I've seen and everything I've heard around him. And then you hear about the leadership and those elements to his game. Just feels like that professional player that can just immediately play some really good footy at the level.
Yeah. That all resonates. The list is so quality now, in my opinion. As I'm trying to put together what that fully healthy, best team looks like, I'm starting to get more questions of I don't know. Maybe he is just a walk-up starter. But maybe I'd be a little less shocked than you if round one comes, and obviously we're super bullish on him, but maybe there's others that, he has to earn it a little more.
Yeah.
Just a little feeling I've got.
I would say, and maybe this again, not going off a lot, but I'd say here the starts in the midfield, or he probably starts in the VFL. I just don't know if he's got that versatility to play in other positions. And also, I don't know if that's the best way to unlock the best out of Jagga Smith and get that potential and see it. Whereas other players, you might start them in a different spot, slowly get them up to the speed. I think just getting him around the team, training and getting games under him is probably the best way, and doing that right in the midfield. Does he start round one? I think he will, but I do agree with you. I was trying to do best 23s and looking at just the caliber of player and what positions we kind of have a lot of depth at. And even though we've lost a guy like Matt Kennedy from that midfield, it's really tough. If everyone's fit, is that last maybe midfield spot, is it Cooper Lord? Is it going to be Jagga Smith? Is it just someone else? Do we need someone who's more versatile and can play a few different roles? I don't know. It's going to be tough. Hopefully everyone can stay fit, so it's the hardest choice of all time. But my question for you, Lockie, and I want everyone in the comments who's watching this on YouTube to let me know your thoughts. If you're listening in audio form, head over to the socials at Navy Blue Corner, because I want to know what your expectations are for Jagga Smith in year one. Now, last few podcasts, we have spoken about how in previous years we've needed these high-end draft picks to come in and be our best player straight away, talking Sam Walsh, those kind of guys. Whereas this time around, we can kind of protect them a little bit more. We don't necessarily need to rush them in. We've got other players in that midfield. We don't have to have like a Paddy Dow, Lockie O'Brien and just kill these guys if they aren't ready straight away. We can ease them into it. And maybe that's the best way to go about it. But in saying that, this is our window right now, Lockie. These next couple of years, if you're looking at the list profile, if you're looking at the ages, everything, this is our time to win. We can't be wasting these years to develop the next best player in 10 years' time if it means we're wasting the careers of who we have now, Curnow, Mackay, Cripps, Wiedering. We can't be wasting these guys. We need to strike right now. So my question is, with all of that and seeing guys like Dacos come in, Ashcroft come in, what is your expectation for Jagga Smith next year? And where do you sit on him needing to impact right now compared to being that 10-year captain?
It's a fantastic question. I think, honestly, I'm leaning more towards the latter. I think so. I'm tempering my expectations of what he provides to us in terms of winning matches. Like I said, I've kind of we're about a month or so removed from the draft now, and my expectations have kind of been tempering even more and more in the way that, like I said, I kind of wouldn't be surprised if we did actually see him in the VFL tearing it up right at the start of the season, just because where we're at with the midfield and the list. And I think if I then fast forward to a year from now, I'd be more disappointed if he played a lot of games in tried in different positions where maybe we were like, oh, okay, not so happy about that, than if he played 10 games at AFL level, doing the right role that he wants to play, that we expect from him at a good level. I don't know if that's a weird kind of way to think about it, but I just, at the end of the day, I think if we win the premiership this year, I don't think the number one reason is going to be the impact that Jagga Smith had.
Yeah, I probably agree with you to an extent. I think if we win the premiership next year, it's probably because we will fit and the forward line started functioning a lot more rather than the midfield, because the midfield's been something that, for the most part, you don't need to touch too much of it as long as everyone's healthy. A fit Chera, fit Walsh running through there, and all of a sudden that's elite. You don't need too much around that in that position, but I'm probably going to be maybe fence sitting. Feel free to let me know if I am. I think there's a bit more maybe balance to it in the sense that maybe the expectations year one around Jagga Smith aren't huge. It's sort of take your time. Let's get the best out of you. But I think something we've spoken about is that because this is our window, we need to add in talent that wins it over the next 3-5 years. This is our time right now. And the last couple of years, we probably haven't brought in a lot of guys to fit those needs. Have we brought in that gun key defender? Have we brought in that gun small forward? Have we brought in that extra pod in the midfield? Not really. And so there's still those tiny elements that maybe we haven't taken that next step because we haven't addressed them to the degree of, he's using a first round pick and bringing in that final missing piece. We kind of haven't done that to the squad right now. So bringing in a guy like Jagga Smith, using all the draft picks to get him in, I think his expectations are lower right now, year one, but year 2, year 3, if he's not adding heaps to this midfield and we're not going to that next level, I would be thinking, did we not do enough on top of getting Jagga Smith in? Because I think you have to be smart knowing Tassie's coming into the competition, that if we start to struggle, we've got enough youth coming through, especially in that midfield, knowing the ages of those guys and how old Crip is starting to get at this stage. In the next 5 years, we need that next crop to come through. But I'd also hate to miss out on winning now because we didn't do enough in bringing in the talent to play right now. So, I feel like I've answered that in a roundabout way with that, expectations from year one. But year 2, year 3 are the big ones for me.
Can I give you a question without notice that you're going to
Yeah.
hate and it's absolutely going to put you on the spot?
Absolutely.
Predict for me the midfield hierarchy at the end of this season. Where do you think we're going to be thinking, like, who's our best midfielder to, give me that list.
Yeah.
Like, the reason I'm asking is, do you think we're going to see Jagga? Are we going to be thinking him that he's a better player than George Hewitt, for example, at the end of the season?
What would your hierarchy be right now?
I think it's Cripps.
Yep.
Walsh.
Yep.
Hewitt.
Yep.
Shearer.
Yep. Lord.
And then
does he take the next?
Probably. Depends if you. Yeah. And then there's guys that a question like Elijah Hollands is here, midfielder. Things like that.
I'll go with those pure guys. I would say Cripps still number 1, Walsh number 2. Chera should be number 3 by then. If he doesn't overtake Hewitt, I think we're not going into a prelim final. And that's nothing against Hewitt. Hewitt's a great player. He does exactly what he needs. But for us to take that next step, Chera needs to be one of our best midfielders, like we saw when he was at the peak of his powers. I would then say at the end of the year, like I'd love Jagga Smith to be next, but it's probably going to be Hewitt, then Smith, then Lord. That's where I would see it. Totally. But if Jagga Smith takes another step and goes above anyone else, then I would be absolutely stoked. I think if that next 2-3 years, I want Jagga Smith to be, competing with the likes of Chera and Walsh in those spots for most impact. Because if we're getting those 4, Cripps, Walsh, Chera, and Jagga as our mainstay midfield or performing peak of their powers, then I think you're winning a flag with that. Yeah,
exactly agree. And that's kind of the point I'm making is how much we all agree that everyone in the 23 is extremely important, but how important is the impact of that 5th best midfielder on an elite team? It is kind of the question. Like if we're expecting him to be our 2nd best midfielder, for example, like the pressure's on you, like we need something from you. But if the best case scenario is his 4th best, then I'm tempering my expectations.
Yeah,
which is good.
I think it's smart, and I think we need to be somewhere in the middle of he needs to come in and be a star, and let's just make sure this guy has a long football career, because we've put a lot of investment already into bringing him to the club. Everyone's already a bit nervous knowing that we've had some high draft picks in somewhat recent years, and they kind of haven't worked out. You can go through a lot of the high-end draft picks, and a lot haven't made it for certain reasons. I think both of us would say the biggest issue with them not becoming a star was the team they came into. And at the moment, we can kind of protect him a lot more. So weirdly, it wouldn't surprise me if he goes above this expectation just because of the protection of the elite midfielders around him being able to elevate himself. But I'm very interested to know where everyone's feeling about Jagga and what's going to be that thing that takes us to the next step of that continual top 4 team that wins flags over the next couple of seasons. Now, we were able to use our next pick in the draft. Thank the Lord. Pick 40. We selected Harry O'Farrell. What were your thoughts on this pick? Being able to use it and then big Harry, bring him into the team.
Obviously a massive win to be able to use it. I was celebrating. Knew a bit about Harry from you and your analysis prior to the draft, which was very handy. To me, it just felt like the perfect pick for what we wanted. We, didn't do anything funky at the top of the draft to try and get, a key position guy, which feels like a very good decision. And it means we get somebody that can develop and hopefully be a gun in a few years.
Yeah, I think as soon as St Kilda traded higher up the draft board, I think they were originally 32. They moved into like 28. Lord knows what that pick ended up becoming. But as soon as they moved a little higher, I thought surely they're not going to move up and then still bid, knowing that Ben's probably closer to the 40s than he is the 20s as a prospect. But that was one of the most stressful watches, just looking at those picks before I was going, please don't bid. Please don't bid. Just let us have one shot And yeah, so my big win from this pick was honestly just being able to use it. Whoever we got almost didn't matter. It was just the fun of being able to have that selection. And then, yeah, I had that draft board of, look, James Barrett, he was off.
Yep.
Noah Mraz, he was gone. There was one other key defender I wanted. We ended up landing him. So at the end of the day, I don't think you can be too unhappy with it. Our biggest development need in the draft past the midfielder was we needed a key defender. If we didn't take one this year, I would have been very worried. So there's really no complaints at all. What are your thoughts on Harry himself from everything you've heard and seen and maybe the interviews after we have drafted him?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, obviously, great to bring a bagger in. We absolutely love that. Like you said, it just gives him a little more grace in the eyes of us as the supporters, for us to be maybe a bit more patient. But yeah, it looks to me like the kind of talent that is someone that Wiedering will be able to mould over the years. Obviously, a lot of development needed for him to be at the level, but hopefully that's where we're at in our timelines where, you know, I'm keen to hear what your thoughts later, but it feels like, you know, our key defender stocks for this year are looking pretty solid. And yeah, like I got no reason to be down on him.
Yeah. No, we needed one and we got one of them. So I'm very happy with that. We got someone who's a Carlton supporter. His dad got Cripper Brownlow. There's so much to love about the selection. It's those little things, but when someone cares so much about the football club to then walk through the doors and put on that jumper, you know that they're just going to give that little bit more. It sounds so stupid, but in footy, such a mental game, and having any little edge, any little thing that makes you work that tiny bit harder, to have that's amazing. And yeah, he's going to be that more long-term developmental prospect. But in this draft class, looking at the start of the year, I had him higher than any other guy in his draft range, particularly in those key defenders. Didn't have the best year with some injury and some other things going on, but the potential's still there. And knowing we don't need him to walk straight in day one and be that starter for us, he could probably hit that ceiling. And that excites me. I love that he's got the number 22. It's a stupid little bit of analysis, but knowing that he's that locker next to Wiedering, you can completely take him under his wing, teach him everything, constantly be that presence. It's not like he's got, you know, locker number 57 and he's on the other corner and it's a lot harder to chat and get that little bit of wisdom. He can just be exactly by the hip of Wiedering, do everything that man does. And over the next 5 or so years, hopefully we can see him blossom into a really good key defender, because it's probably that one thing we don't have, someone in that age bracket.
Yeah, no, totally. Very happy with the business we did there.
And then a few picks later, at pick 43, the bid came for Ben. And what did you make of the bid maybe arriving so quick after we picked up Harry?
Yeah, I don't know what expectations I had. I definitely was expecting that he was going to slide through and we were going to get that 40. Like that was the talk of everything. And you know, the narrative that these father-sons tend to go a bit later than they should as well. But yeah, I guess it did come a little quicker than I thought there. But yeah, what's not to love, like seeing the scenes in their house and all that. Like that's just my favorite content.
It is. I absolutely love it. No, I mean, there's not too much more I can say about this man. He dominated every time he played. Does he have all those extra elements to his game? Is he the goal-kicking midfielder? Is he the bloke who's got, you know, 99 FIFA pace? No, he's not, but he's just your simple ball-winning midfielder. And the hardest thing to do at any level is just accumulate the ball, be in the right positions, have that footy IQ. Yeah. He's got that in spades. He's got the height. He can take marks. And much like Jagga, but even to a bigger extent, there's just no pressure on Ben getting into this team anytime soon. He can really develop.
Yeah.
And knowing that there's been so many big games that he's been best on ground, he's been best of field and been able to better a lot of the guys that have gone really high in this draft. Is exciting to know we're getting him at such a discount at pick 43, where we gave up pick 60, 66, those kind of picks to bring him into the football club, to not have that pressure. It's really exciting. And I think the one thing talking about him and then Lucas at pick 54 was there's something about good teams bidding on these players that makes them higher in my thoughts. Geelong were the ones that bid on Ben, Sydney on Lucas, knowing it wasn't like, Gold Coast or North Melbourne, those kind of teams that don't have that stature in maybe bringing in the best talent. Geelong and Sydney potentially have the best track record for finding talent, for scouting, even later in drafts. So to see that they, to some degree, valued them to waste their time bidding makes me think, okay, there's a little bit more to these two than just, your run-of-the-mill father-son later the draft picks. Did that have any bearing on your thoughts of those two selections?
I actually hadn't thought about it from the club perspective of which clubs did it, but I was very happy that the bids were so close together, and it wasn't like Lucas sliding through or whatever that for him. I'm glad he didn't have to deal with that. Like, Ben's been picked, but I haven't yet for too long. It might have only been 10, 15 minutes. So,
And then, same with sort of Lucas, in that his pick went a lot higher than I was expecting at pick 54. So then that again makes me think, okay, if other teams are rating him a little bit higher than maybe I did in my rankings, then there's a little bit more, particularly when these father-sons clubs aren't scouting them. They're not putting as much time into it. It's also not a lot of reason for them to put a bid on them. They know they're not getting him. Teams don't really care about making other clubs pay up. So seeing them go where they did was really pleasing. And then, Lucas is pretty much a halfback or winger. He's a lot more of that outside skill, a little bit better by foot than Ben. Two completely different players. One's the inside mid, one's the outside. They can just take their time and develop. You're getting these guys for free. Absolutely love it. Both just seem to find the footy whenever they played, which is a really exciting thing. And then our last pick was in the rookie draft, had a spot left. Yes. We used it on Harry Charleson. You probably don't know a lot about him. I can't imagine a lot do in many in the rookie draft. So I'll give you a bit of a quick rundown. He's a halfback from the GWV Rebels. Now, he's someone that I saw a couple of his games last season. He was on my radar to watch this year. Ended up playing all 4 games for Vic Country. So this isn't a guy that was just picked out of obscurity. He put in the work and he got that reward and the opportunity for it. And as I said, it was someone on my radar going into the year. He just maybe didn't have as good a year this year and took that massive, massive step, which is why we took him in the rookie draft. He wasn't selected in the national draft. And when I do my rankings, I do a top 70 and then there's just a bunch of names after that unranked. If I was to rank the next 10, he would have been in that. So he wasn't that far off the guys I thought were in the potential to be drafted in the national draft. So that's kind of where I would have him roughly. He's someone that he's just a fast rebounding defender. He can take a couple of intercepts, but he's a running machine. He wins a lot of the football. Looking at some of his stats, if I can find them in front of me here, he averaged 21.4 disposals for the Rebels, 17.8 for Vic Country. He uses the ball well. He either likes to just mark it, kick the ball out, or run. I looked at his combine results as well. He finished 6th overall in the 2K time trial. So he's got that endurance behind him already. I think when I'm looking at a lot of the traits that he has, they're things I think we need. If we were going to pick up any sort of halfback, his traits are the ones that I would be wanting to bring into the club. So I think it's a real just easy win selection. If he becomes a player, great. If he doesn't, it's a rookie pick. It doesn't really matter. But he's got what I would be wanting us to draft, if that makes sense. And I think we spoke about in the trade period for a Dan Houston that I'd kind of much rather us just not waste that capital on that and just draft someone else later. And I'm not saying that, Harry Charleson's going to become Dan Houston, although Dan Houston himself was chosen in the rookie draft. So that's kind of what I'm talking about with these guys who become your decent halfbacks. Teams don't spend big. they find them from somewhere, and this is definitely that guy that I think could come on and be your decent average halfback. And yeah, I don't have a lot more to say about Harry Charleson. Just he's got the pace, he's got the run, and he can use the football. If he develops, beautiful.
Yeah, no, that's exactly what I wanted to hear. I mean, yeah, a great season from him is that he plays in the VFL and stands out enough that we notice him and are talking about him. So if he can do that, even that's fantastic.
Yeah, he's probably defending let him down a little bit, but he's being brought in to play an attacking role, so I don't want to knock him too much for it. But we've been wanting those traits. We want someone who's got some speed, got some dash, wants to take the game on. That's the thing I was impressed of when I saw Harry Charleson. So if that can blossom, I think we're massive winners. And I've thrown a question in here that I pretty much got for myself. So Lockie, if you want to absolutely dive in and take this one, go for it.
So this is about the trades, right? The pick swap. So
absolutely, because I think this was something that, sorry to then just completely take over again, but I'll do that. In that a lot of people were, we had traded up to pick 3? We had 2 juicy picks in a super draft that had a lot of depth. What should we do with this? A lot of people were worrying. So hopefully we can give you a bit of an answer to this one.
And I think I already know what your answer is going to be, because we're always thinking the same about these kind of things. But yeah, so if you could have gone back, would you, if you knew that it would be pick 15 and 17 that we could have had instead of this pick 3, would you have preferred that? And I guess the question also would be, who would you have taken in those spots?
Yeah. Well, it's funny that the 2 players that I would have said before we traded, if we just had those picks, and that's what I did my draft profiles, all of that on, I would have had 2 guys at the complete top of my list. Like if we could get these 2, perfect draft. Both we could have got at the selections, which would have been at pick 15, Joe Berry, who went with that pick to West Coast. And then Luke Traynor would have been the one I would have wanted at pick 17, the key defender. A few other players that would have been available as well that I liked, a Bo Allen, Ollie Hannaford, Harrison Oliver, if you wanted another halfback. Jesse Detoli is your small as well that can kind of play a bit of midfield. So the players that I would have liked were all there. We could have had that perfect draft, which maybe makes you think I'd say keep those 2 picks. But I think any time you've got the chance of getting a top 5, a top 3 player, potentially best player in the draft in Jagga Smith from what he did all season, being the number 1 for everyone until like the last month before the draft, when everyone gets cute like myself and starts changing all their rankings. I think you take that top pick. The likelihood of, picks 15 and 17 becoming A-grade talent that win your flag, so much smaller than the probability of a pick 3 becoming an absolute gun. So I think you take the best talent available, and we still managed to get, O'Farrell with our other pick in the 40s, a guy who earlier in the year I was ranking, 20, 25 in this draft. I think that's a massive win. And I'm so happy with what we did. I have no complaints with our draft picks this season. We'll see how that goes in 10 years' time and how they all develop. But on face value, I don't think we could have done any better at our picks.
And that was going to be my next question, is there a different era in the last 10 years where maybe you would have felt the other way? Like, is there a different iteration of this team where you think, okay, maybe we would want to bring in 2 high-level guys rather than the 1 super high-level guy? Or is it always...
It's a great question.
It's
a great question. I feel like probability-wise, it makes sense to go that top end. I think because you're able to bring in such a high-end midfielder, it makes sense for our team right now. Like if we brought in a Luke Traynor, well, he's not playing for a fair few years, and then you've got a small forward, but is he as prolific? It's hard to know. I think at the end of the day, with our list needs and where we are, you just go bringing in the best guy possible rather than taking a dart throw at 2 others. Unless you knew 100% you were bringing in, the best small forward in the competition and another really gun player. I just think it makes more sense to go the more known commodity.
Yeah, I agree. I can't think of a year where I would have wanted to pass up on what
if they
we're
were
getting
higher
from Jagga.
pick, you'd probably
Yeah.
want the 2, but 15 and 17 is still that little bit far back. So let's recap the offseason, all the ins and outs. And I've got him in this list because even though we got him in the mid-year, he was taking a list spot that basically didn't exist. We had one too many on the list. So I'm going to include him in this also because it makes sense when I'm talking about who came in, who came out. So Cooper Lord is going to stay on our ins basically with a little asterisk. Nick Haynes, Harry O'Farrell, Jagga Smith, Ben and Lucas Camporeale, Harry Charleson, and then Matt Duffy as well onto the list. Out, Matt Kennedy, Caleb Marchbank, Dom Aquay, Jack Carroll, David Cunningham, Jack Martin, Matt Owie, Sam Durden, asterisk. He's still training with us, same as Matt Carroll. And then I've thrown on the 2025 future first round pick as well as something we got rid of.
True.
What do you make of those ins and outs, Lockie? Are you happy with our overall business? How would you be grading that as sort of a transfer window?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's an interesting one. It's definitely a mixed bag, I would say. Like, and still so much to play out. What happens to Jack Martin this season? Like, that's something that I feel like would even change the way that we think about all these things. You know, like a lot of those outs are things that just had to happen. It was the right time, but there's nothing here that's kind of like spectacular to me about this off season. Like, I feel like we kind of could have predicted that it would go this way potentially before, you know, as soon as the season ended. Like, there's nothing splashy, so I can't give us an A, for example.
Yeah,
but there's nothing here that didn't like really.
Yeah, I'll probably give it a B, just because as good as it is to bring in, you know, a Jagga Smith, bring in a pick 3, that's insane. There's that part of I want to win now, and maybe it's why I'm not a list manager, because I'm just thinking these next, 2 seasons ahead. And could we have done more to bring in something else, an asset that allows us to win now? That doesn't have to be giving away the first round pick for a Dan Houston, but are there other role players that bring us, that you could bring in? Is there a small forward, someone out there that elevates us that I've seen other teams be able to do and win flags? I don't know. And when I'm, I guess, reviewing who moved in the off season, there's probably no one I'd really want to bring in that wasn't Josh Battle, Tom Barras, but then you're looking at what you have to give up to do it. I'm probably not doing that. So at the end of the day, the business is a B or a B plus. Big question I'll throw at you though, Lockie. Are there any areas that we maybe failed to improve or failed to replace? Because, Cooper Lord basically takes that Matt Kennedy role, Haynes for Marchbank, O'Farrell becomes Dom as that developing defender. We've brought in, Jagga Smith basically replaces a Jack Carroll. And then you've lost guys like Cunningham, Martin, Owies, brought in, just some youth like, the Camporeales, Charleson, Duffy.
Yep.
Have we replaced enough? How do you kind of see the business that way?
I kind of feel like we have. I think the depth chart looks pretty healthy. We will talk about them trying players in different spots, which increases flexibility in that regard also. And then you also got to remember, like, that a lot of these young guys are having another preseason, and a lot of them will be, in different places in their career next year, hopefully. Like, you can throw random names out there, like maybe Wilson will be ready to play a bit of a role this year. Will we see O'Keefe for whatever reason next year? Like, who knows how these guys are developing in the off season? So I'm feeling pretty bullish on everything. I can't really pick a spot where I go, I don't feel like we hit that, and we should have.
Yeah, like what were the areas we probably needed to improve? A point of difference midfielder. Do you think we've probably addressed that in Jagga Smith, or at least we wanted the point of difference midfielder, and now we've got a, whether we wanted that or not, we've got a top 3 pick, potentially pick 1 in a draft midfielder for the next 10 years. Is that a tick for you?
Well, I guess we're hearing the coach, everyone's saying speed and power in this preseason. And do we have that speed and power in the midfield? We didn't necessarily add to that, I guess. But is that
ready?
That's just our rhetoric, I guess.
Yeah, it's probably a wait and see. We can't necessarily tick that off at the moment, but at least we've addressed it to some degree. Ready-made key defender with Nick Haynes. Happy with that?
I suppose so. It's debatable where people see him as best 23 or not, but I'd rather have Haynes on the list than Marchbank.
Yes, I think it's an upgrade. Would I prefer an even bigger upgrade? Yes, I still think it's a slight issue.
Of course.
But I guess, again, I don't want to go too hard right now because I don't know what's going to happen. And I know at the moment, Lockie, you're in London. You've just absolutely fallen in love with Chelsea and you're loving, the English soccer. I'm a massive Liverpool man. And, there was a season where we didn't really upgrade anything. And there were so many areas we all thought we needed to. All of a sudden we went and, won the league the next year. And you're like, hang on a minute, what are you talking about? So it can happen where just the players that you have can take that next step, even without you properly addressing things you see as needs. I'm hoping that can kind of happen there, but at least we brought in something. And then developing key defender, that's a tick. We brought in O'Farrell. We didn't necessarily bring in that prolific, small, medium goal kicker. That guy, we lost Always, we lost Jack Martin. But is that Motlop? Is that Ashton Moyer? Is that guys we already have? And did we need to bring them in? I'd say question mark, but I'm happy at least to not have to deal with the Jack Martin headache. And then, a guy like Matt Always, I think we're better off by allowing a pathway. And there's certain things with Always maybe getting in the way, not being that crumbing forward, that I think we could end up being better off for in that regard. How do you see the sort of small, medium forward stocks?
By the way, it's a dangerous precedent that you have now set, bringing the Premier League into this podcast. So we'll wait and see how that plays out. Yeah, like as you were talking earlier about like Joe Berry, for example, like if we'd brought him into this team, is that like, I don't know, what does that say for our belief in someone like Motlop? Like I want to believe in Motlop and Moyer that they will be able to take the right steps in these coming years. Like I'm optimistic that they can in 2025.
Yeah. I mean, even Zach Williams, you throw into that, he stays healthy, kicked a fair amount of goals in the back half of last year. When thrown into the forward line, it maybe does make it hard for a Berry to come in. And that's why I think it probably shouldn't have been a draftee. It needed to be either someone who just immediately overtakes them, or I guess you just got to back in what you have. Key forward depth is probably the next position, which could be Liam McMahon if we do end up taking him.
Yes.
We've got him as a train-on player at the moment. Makes sense. I feel like that's the most obvious move we'll be making.
My gut says we will.
Yeah, and then I guess the other thing was just overall to the squad, add some speed and better ball use, better decision-making. Have we addressed that? Maybe not completely. But at the end of the day, the big thing we probably need to win the flag is everyone stays healthy. And if we have that, we don't have to worry about adding those other little pieces. Fossey's been talking about it, as you mentioned, getting Rob Innes in. Is he the guy that allows that speed and power to actually flourish? And maybe it's been there all along, but we haven't executed it right with the fitness program that we've had. There's a lot of question marks, and maybe that's why I can't rate these businesses the greatest of all time, because there's still question marks. There were question marks going into last season, and it worries me slightly. But if, again, it's such an annoying thing to say, if we stay healthy, there's not many areas on the list I'm that worried about.
It's just where we're at. Like that's just where I really feel this team is at right now. Like all of the caveat to all of this is that I felt like that we could win the flag before this period, and that hasn't changed.
Yeah, we were sitting second. We all thought we could. It fell apart when injuries started to happen and everything started to collapse in the back end of the season. The talent's there. The talent is definitely there. And I think the good thing about this offseason is just that we didn't really lose anything. You can argue we didn't improve enough. Although, again, like I mentioned, Was there enough out there that moved in the offseason that would have really improved us? I don't think so. But what you can't argue is we didn't lose a lot. You know, Kennedy, Owies, Martin were probably the three biggest losses. So I want to just quickly go through those. Kennedy losing borderline best 22 anyway. Do you think it was a massive, massive loss? Do you think we can replace it?
I don't think it's a massive loss. I found it peculiar that he got the Best Clubman award. I don't know if we spoke about that on the podcast or not.
Not a lot. Even if we did, we'll go over it again. Why not?
Yeah, why not? I thought that was just there was just an interesting thing. Like, he obviously played every game, I think, or maybe only missed one, and then to go for not a whole lot. I can see why you would cast a peculiar perspective on that. But again, I just don't think it makes that much of a difference. Like, we saw how well we did last year with him being the Mr. Fix-It. Like, not as good as we would want. So
no, look, I love him. I love what he was bringing, but keeping him wasn't going to improve us, which is just the harsh reality of it. Cooper Lord, Jagga Smith, they've got a higher ceiling. So I'm okay with taking that risk of losing that maybe more competent footballer right now for trying to get something to take us to the next step and unlock something else. And I think a fit error completely changes what we are, to then bring in a top 3 draftee, keep the development of a guy like Cooper Lord, who even just Cooper Lord himself, I think, and maybe this is a big call, I think he can already match Kennedy's output next year, because those inside midfielders, they're not those highly sought after commodities. No one really wants them. That's why we didn't get a lot back for a guy like Matt Kennedy. I think you can replace that. And I think a guy like Cooper Lord, to a degree, can replicate what Kennedy did in the midfield if he is going to be the one that takes that spot, or if it's simply just a fit error. Matt always is the next one. I think we've spoken about it a lot. He kicks goals, but the way he played, was that hurting us more than it helped? What's your kind of take on that?
Yeah, it's funny. I'm obviously viewing all of this glass half full in the optimistic with my Carlton, Navy lenses on. So it's one of those ones where if we ended up keeping him and it just felt like it was pretty much impossible for us to do that. Like, we would have been fine with it, but he's not the difference maker. And so much of this is dependent on, well, not only the health and all that, but the development of these high ceiling guys. Like, we need Motlop to go to that next level. We need him to be better than what Owies has given us for us to be a really good team, in my opinion. And
I agree, but look, the big thing was, Owies has kicked 30 goals. Well, Motlop, obviously this year was very injured, barely played all season, but the year before that, in his second year of AFL football, he kicked 24 goals. If he can just have that kind of level of input, obviously we want higher. I think you're getting basically the Owies return, but I'd say more, because obviously Motlop is giving that pressure. He's a bit more of a crumbing forward rather than being that sort of small, mid-sized marking target. And then you think about, being able to add a pathway for Moya to come into the team. You've got Zach Williams now in that forward line. I just don't think it's as big of a risk as some are maybe making out by moving on an Owies. I think I'm happy with that move. And then the last one probably would be Martin, which is probably the biggest loss. But you could never get on the park. So how big is that loss? And how are you kind of seeing that departure?
Yeah, like I touched on before, like, that feels like the one that is most likely to make us I don't want to use the word regret, like cringe, in terms of like or like be frustrated with it, but how frustrated were we during this season? Like, I'm just so fed up with how his body has been, which is so unfortunate obviously for him. I'm very empathetic of how it is for his career and everything, but with these injuries plaguing us as a team, unfortunately, the three biggest culprits in that regard, it was just their time.
Yeah. And you'd say Moya is the most likely to take his spot next year. And this is maybe a really dumb thing to say, but if he can give half the output of Martin, but actually play more than 15 games, I say that's a better deal in the long run. And, replacing the best of Martin is really difficult, because at his best, he was such a good player. The pressure he was able to bring, his marking ability, he would be that extra target and force defenders to actually go towards him, which maybe a Moya might not be able to do early on because he doesn't have that presence straight away. But I want to take a look at some stats because I deep dived a little bit into Jack Martin. The most goals he ever kicked in a season was 24. If you take away last year where Jack Martin managed only the 3 games, over his career, Jack Martin averaged approximately 15 games with an average of 13 goals. Do you think Moya can match that, play 15 games and kick at least 13 goals? And I know that's like kind of stupid because we've barely seen anything of Moya, but if the output of Jack Martin is 15 games, 13 goals, do you think Moya can get that done? Or maybe that's Zach Williams' job to do that?
No, of course. Of course. When you put it that way, it's clear. Like, I think one of the things that the idea of Martin promised was, like, I guess, a point of difference, like somebody that could be an aerial threat and good on the ground as well. So if we can manage to have that from a different player, then the output you're talking about right there is replicable in so many different areas.
Yeah. And I mean, the big thing is obviously the fitness of Martin. And again, I'm interested to know your thoughts on this weird analysis. It was just a weird thought I had the other day.
Okay.
And thinking about the guys we got rid of, we obviously got rid of Martin, Cunningham, Marchbank, a lot of injury-prone players. I just wonder, and I know we've got a completely new fitness staff, all of that's been changed, but when so many resources are going into a handful of players just to get them on the park, to try and maintain them, you'd think so much of their planning throughout the offseason is, how do we get Jack Martin fit? There's so much planning would be involved in that. And then the rehab all season, take that away. There's going to be so much more time that this fitness staff can actually spend planning and preparing, putting time weekly into the rehab of someone else. They don't have these big headaches, these big problems anymore. I wonder what that does for the rest of the squad and just the overall fitness in just the time and effort and resources that don't have to be put into these 3 or 4 guys all year.
The old addition by subtraction.
Yeah.
I think
it's such a dumb thing, but yeah.
I don't think it is dumb. We have to remember that this is the real world and, like, these are real people in a real workplace. And it genuinely, I think, would make a big difference. I don't think that's dumb.
So it is definitely going to be very interesting to see how our fitness goes this season. It's going to be one of the biggest talking points for sure. Now, the last thing of, I guess, the off season, there are still 2 list spots left. Got a few train-on players at the moment, Sam Durden and Matt Carroll, who are basically delisted, but they're still there with an opportunity. Denver, Granger, Barras, and Liam McMahon are the official train-on players. There's also a couple of others that maybe I need to learn the rules a little bit more to know if they are eligible as well. But a guy like Ethan Phillips has been signed to our VFL team. Francis Evans as well onto our VFL squad. Be interesting if we can just throw them on as well. I think I need to ask Pommy about that, or whether they have to be specific train-on players, because I'm pretty sure you can kind of just go about it however you want and pick anyone available. But what are your thoughts on that kind of crop of players and where the list sits? We've spoken about this a little bit, but to say right now, sort of gun to your head, who are you taking as the last 2 list spots?
I think that I like the thought of taking a chance on Granger Barras as somebody who was pick 6, still young, like 22 years old, is, I think, a good area for a good age profile for us.
Yeah.
So I can understand why you would prefer Durden over him, like maybe more of a known commodity, but then again has had so many injuries with us. So I'll say Denver over him. And then, like we said earlier, I think McMahon just kind of makes sense. I love us rewarding the program. Like, that pathway feels like a really strong thing for the club. And he's also, not in a position of need in that he'll be playing, like, have a lot of opportunity. But I think it's nice to add, that position to the mix. So that would be my 2. I don't think that's where we'll go, though.
Yeah, interesting. What do you think we'll do? Do you have any ideas?
I think it'll be Durden and McMahon.
I would hate it to be Durden, to be honest. Like, to be very harsh on him, I'm just kind of, I'm sick of seeing the guy not be fit, and we just have this meant to be ready-made guy not be available. I think I'd much rather Ethan Phillips over Durden because, 197 centimeters. I've seen him play and he can stay relatively healthy. And I like the Liam McMahon thing. He's definitely someone I would take. Like you're saying, reward the pathway. It's why we've probably got Ethan Phillips along. He's looking at this list saying key defender's a little bit of a problem for Carlton. Even if I'm not in the train on players, if I sign to their VFL team and they have these injuries again, mid-season draft, it's a good chance they just select me because they need a body. I can play. I've proven it. I've got that leadership. I can come in. So that would be my pick over Durden, but I probably agree with you, even though he's 194, a little bit smaller. He's only 22. Why not just take a punt for a year on a Granger Barras and just see what's there? Clearly, Hawthorn didn't like it. They didn't rate him amazingly, bringing in, some more high-end talent to fill that role. But for that last list spot that almost doesn't matter, fingers crossed, because of what else we've got, why not give the opportunity there? I think there's still a need for a ready-made key defender. So I'd be shocked if we don't address that key defender and we take Matt Carroll instead.
So
that'd surprise me.
What do you think will happen?
I think it'll be Granger, Barras, and McMahon. I think that's the more obvious thing. But I mean, if it's Durden, who knows? That'll be interesting. So let's wrap this up with a couple of things. Let's gear towards next year, Lockie, because I'll be honest, that's where my mind has been going throughout this entire episode. And there's been a bit of preseason chatter. There's been a bit of Navy noise around the place. Vossi been driving his Hyundai around, answering all the questions, and a few little things have come out. And one of those is that Brody Kemp is definitely training as a forward. That's where they see him. Jack Silvagni is training as a defender. There's also been thrown out there that Olli Hollands might be a bit of a halfback come this year. Let me know all your thoughts on that. So let's start at Brody Kemp. How do you feel about him being a forward?
God, I have so many just questions about all of these three. More questions than answers. I mentioned Jack Martin earlier, and so I'm interested at Harry and Charlie. What is the next? What's the next piece of that puzzle? I really like us having someone that can be a target, which is something that I felt like that we've lacked.
Yeah.
Is Brody Kemp that right target? Is the question that I have. I can't remember if it was him talking in an interview. I feel like it was. He talked about that he'll be taking the third defender. And that's an opportunity, you know what I mean? That's a big opportunity if he's taking the third defender and he makes space for the other guys, but he can be a threat as well. That sounds good. And I guess this also says to me that maybe they're not as bullish on him being a key defender as maybe we were at times.
It just feels weird to me. I agree. I don't think it's the right move. And I know just because you train as something over preseason doesn't mean we can't then switch it back. He knows how to be a key defender. They're probably just trying to teach something else as well. But I just don't know where he fits in the forward line necessarily when I'm trying to find our best team right now. Obviously, you've got Harry and Charlie. Elijah Hollands takes that high half forward role. You'd say Motlop and Zach Williams are probably your small forward. Zach Williams can kind of be a bit of a marking target as well. I'd say the other spot in there is probably Fogarty as another pressure player that can kind of be that high half forward as well. That leaves one more spot in that kind of forward line. It feels like the most obvious thing there is Jack Silvagni to be that other one, or Ashton Moyer. One of those two to be the marking target. Silvagni is your extra ruck. That solves that dilemma. It just feels like you're moving Kemp forward, okay. the spot's not necessarily there. I still think Silvagni's probably a better forward. And now probably the bigger issue is, well, now you've just put a massive hole in our key defensive stocks that I don't love anyway. So that's Nick Haynes takes that spot. But then who else is it? Now you're forced to move Silvagni back. It's like, if you just did nothing, you weren't having to move other players around. I just don't. The small sample size of Brody Kemp as a forward was okay. But does him as a forward stop Ashton Moir playing? That's probably my bigger concern. Where do you kind of see all the moving parts going?
But couldn't you say the same thing about Silvagni forward then? Like, is Harry, Charlie, Silvagni, and Moir all in the one forward line good?
Potentially not, but I think I think probably where I maybe haven't expressed as much is the hole at key defender that moving Brody Kemp out of that causes, and then throwing in Silvagni, who I don't think is a defender, is just like, I'd rather just Silvagni and Moir fight for that spot than throwing in Kemp.
Sure.
Because I think from my perspective, if you're throwing Brody Kemp forward, that's you saying he is almost starting in that lineup. Whereas at the start of this, if you're not moving anything, my brain says Moir and Silvagni are fighting for that forward spot, rather than, Kemp's just got it now. And I just think that's, very strange. I'm like you, I've got so many more questions than answers. Again, happy to be proven wrong. If Brody Kemp becomes the greatest third forward ever, amazing. So happy for that. And if Silvagni becomes the best key defender, you beauty. But I just don't think that's the right move, and it doesn't fix that issue of who's second ruck as well.
I understand your point about the leaving a gap in the defense. But if I'm just thinking about the forward line functioning, pull me up if this is recency bias. But have we seen a big enough sample size of Charlie, Harry, and Silvagni all playing good quality footy together? Because when I'm thinking back, it feels like Harry's kind of troubling times was kind of when Silvagni was there. And then obviously we had all the injury era before that. And then this season was really good years from Harry and Charlie, but Silvagni wasn't there. I'm questioning whether that is the right mix and whether the ceiling of Kemp to try is something different.
I think it's a great question to throw out there, and I don't necessarily have an answer. I know when we were playing some really good football at the back half of 23, Silvagni was in that forward line, kicking goals, crumbing, and being another outlet, and I thought that was a really exciting prospect. I think probably what I'd almost... I guess what I'd probably throw back at you is, which is maybe what I think in the whole Silvagni thing in the first place, and why I think it's Moir instead, is I just get worried about throwing in a third tall, because I think that's what they see Kemp as. I see Silvagni being able to play a bit smaller. I see Kemp a lot taller. And I don't think, if I'm looking at maybe recency bias, the best our forward line looked last year was obviously against West Coast, but it was when we were small. And throwing another tall in there when we were already struggling with trying to get those two key talls working together with the space that was non-existent in our forward line, just throwing a third definite key forward, like when we had McGovern down there, I just feel like that's so much worse for isolating space inside forward 50. And it's why I think I'm so against Kemp being there, because I think Silvagni plays smaller, weirdly.
I understand.
But I think regardless, I'd want Moir in over Silvagni or Kemp.
I think this is why this is such a good discussion. There's so many ways to think about this. What if it's Charlie getting higher up the ground than we've ever seen before? Like, what if it's him playing more of that, that come up to the wing, turning and getting it forward, and maybe that presents the opportunity for Kemp to be really deep. Like, how do you feel about him being kind of isolated one-on-one? Like, maybe that's something that could grow. Yeah. Like I've said this whole episode, I'm looking at all these things with a positive eye. If we didn't do this, then we're basically just, I guess, not trying anything new positionally, right? Like, we're just kind of running it back, which I also don't think is the worst thing because I'm bullish on us anyway.
Yeah. That's probably where I'm sitting, where I didn't think it was a massive problem. I think the issue with Brodie Kemp as a defender was that we were making him have to be this like second lockdown defender. And I just don't think that's him. I think he's the third marking defender. And so I kind of have to tie these two together with Silvagni moving down there. I don't think Silvagni's that. I think Silvagni would be the third tall. So I think Kemp's a better defender. I think Silvagni's a better forward. I'm all for trying something, and if it works, it works. Unbelievable. Like if making Charlie go higher up the ground, it unlocks something, and we play the best football, wins as a flag. Amazing. Like I'm happy they're trying something. I like us doing different things. It just feels like every move here just causes another issue. Like the easiest solution to a problem we faced this year was bring Silvagni in, adds pressure into the forward line, a marking target into the forward line who can also crumb, play small, and pinch hit in the ruck. And all of a sudden it's like, oh, we now put a hole in key defense. Silvagni's going down there, never really played there. Kemp's going forward. Has that really ever worked? Don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Just feels more problematic than it's solving solutions for me. That's why I'm a bit concerned on it. But I'm happy to be proven wrong.
Feel you. Yeah, I'm definitely not going to put a line through it. I'd be much more confident that Kemp would work out than Silvagni would work out, in my opinion. Like, that's a lot harder for me to visualize how that would work, Silvagni back. But
backline, how do you see it? Because you were very bullish throughout all the season saying Brodie Kemp is in that defensive spot. It's Wiedering, it's McGovern, it's Kemp. You seem to like that a lot last year without sort of putting words in your mouth and talking for you.
No. You're right.
We've brought in Nick Haynes. Both of us are like fine for that depth wise, not necessarily sure he's the starter. So how do you see that key defense working, taking Kemp out? And how do you see Silvagni getting thrown in there?
No, but you're 100% right. If there was none of this chatter or the things that are happening, I would have kept it as is, and I would have said that Wiedering, McGovern, Kemp is who we want, and then Haynes is the first one in. And I guess that's what you described as Kemp's deficiencies is like that level of optimism I have of Silvagni is like, could his role be to be that like not exciting defender that frees up McGovern to be his best self and maybe a bit of Wiedering as well? Is Haynes down there as well? Like we've seen times where it's Marchbank as the fourth in there. Like, is that what they're picturing? Wiedering, McGovern, Silvagni, and Haynes. It sounds weird when I say it, but maybe that's what they're thinking.
Is Silvagni big enough to play that? Like, I know he's taller than Kemp, which is weird. I would have said it's the other way around, but Silvagni definitely doesn't have that stronger build. How do you kind of see him if he was to play a bit more of a lockdown role?
I guess it's team dependent, like player dependent, like matchup dependent.
Yeah.
I suppose. I'm not super, like I said, I'm not super optimistic on the Silvagni back.
Yeah. Just feel like
it's hard for me to picture the perfect role.
I thought when Kemp was at his best last year, we were playing our best footy. When we were using him correctly, we were playing really well.
Yeah.
Would have liked to have kind of seen that continue because now instead of what our best defense was, we're kind of relying on either Silvagni or like a 34-year-old Nick Haynes to be that thing that takes us to the next level. It just feels a little risky. And I know as stupid as it is, we can just switch it. If it's not working, hey, Kemp, just go back and be a defender. It's not like all of a sudden Kemp has forgotten how to play that role and he's going to be so much worse because he didn't spend a preseason training as a defender. I'm sure you can switch it up. So, yeah, I don't mind that we're trying something. It just, from the eye test, feels wrong.
Yeah, I agree with that. And again, if I was going to do that optimistic look at things, the sample size that we've seen of Silvagni back has been so small, but we have so much evidence, both from Carlton and in the AFL, of key forwards where it never properly clicked.
Yeah,
going back and that being their place. So the fact that there's that precedent as well, because like, oh man, I've heard so much, and maybe this is me being too short-sighted, but so many people being like, 2022 Jack Silvagni was a problem. Like, he was so good. We all forget. And I'm like, was he actually that good, though? He had a couple of... It felt like he had a few good games where he kicked a bunch of goals, but I still remember him not really having his perfect place.
Yeah. No, I agree. I still don't know if Jack Silvagni's in our best team. Like, I wrote a little best 22, best 23. He's not there. Ashton Moy is in that spot. My forward line is Fogarty, Mackay, Hollands, Motlop, Curnow, Williams, Moyer is my front 7. I don't have Silvagni there. And I definitely don't have him in the key defensive stocks.
Yeah. So
I agree with you in the sense of people having that maybe blindness and love for Sauce, saying he is that missing piece. Remember how good he was. He's had some good games, but I agree, he hasn't necessarily always functioned. Maybe that is the perfect thing for Kemp because he is more athletic. We've seen him flight the ball a little bit better. He can mark probably better than Silvagni can. Maybe it is the right thing to do there. I just maybe worry about what that does to our defensive stocks because I don't think we were well placed originally. And taking Kemp out is kind of like, oh no, now it is Nick Haynes. I have my what I think they'll do, which is Nick Haynes plays there, but that doesn't fill me with the greatest amount of confidence.
I think that
at all.
I think that's what will happen too.
Yeah. Well, something that's a bit more positive potentially is the other move that seems to be happening, which is Olli Hollands to play a little bit more off half back. How do you see that? We saw it at the back end of last year, the last couple of games, him float back there. What do you make of that? And then who would potentially take his wing spot if he is to start off half back?
Well, I have zero recollection of those of him playing there in those games. They were such a blur to me. I was in Melbourne for those couple of weeks, and I think my eyes were just glazed over that entire St Kilda game in agony. So I can't really comment on the sample size. This weirdly feels like the weirdest one to me, though. Like, it felt like a year ago, the pathway felt very clear as him to develop as a mid. And obviously you look at our midfield depth now and it's like, okay, well, why would we want him to be a midfielder? But yeah, that's my question back to you. Is Doherty going to the wing? Do they see Binns as a starting wing? I would doubt it.
Yeah. Well, my initial thing, without thinking who replaces him, was, I quite liked him off the halfback. I don't mind him spending some time there. I love about Olli Hollands, obviously runs all day, but then he wanted to take the game on. And clearly, I think just from looking at this on a surface level, one of the things we've struggled with is moving the ball, trying to take the game on, wanting to run, get that run and carry off halfback, that creativity. Yep. I think Olli Hollands adds to that when you got, Nick Newman doing a bit of that, Sard, Hollands, Cowan. I like that makeup. Guys that want to be tackling, guys that want to bring pressure, but then also go forward the other way and be creative. Quite like it. But I also really think he's our second best winger behind Akers. So who takes that spot? I assume it will be Doherty. And then, what we saw of Binns, small sample size, I liked. I thought he was quite attacking. He was doing well there. So, yeah, it's but more... But
is he a best 23? No.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I think I may be seeing this one a bit more in the sense of he might have his time split, halfback and also on the wing. Does Doherty and Hollands just spend half a game switching? Is that something we could do with those two? Potentially.
I don't mind that.
Where, without maybe answering that question and then just throwing another one your way, with Olli Hollands in the back line, where do you see that depth chart? We've got the 3 key defenders. Who is the lock in that sort of back pocket halfback rankings for you? And where would Olli Hollands fit and who maybe misses out?
This is harder to me than the midfield one. Like
it's 4 spots. It's tough.
Yeah, it is. And that's why it's probably weird. Like I would have Newman and Sard at the top.
Yep.
I think Cowan is a best 23 guy.
I agree.
And,
That last
like
spot's the only one up for grabs, that Ollie Holland spot for me. I tend to agree.
Exactly. We know that Chincotta, unfortunately, is going to miss some time. I don't know where I sit him compared to Boyd.
Yeah. I'd say they're pretty close.
Yeah.
I like the idea of it, and what this is, maybe it's again hypocritical talking about the Kemp Silvagni move, but I like trying something different here. And what I saw, probably just because what I saw from him down there, I liked it, and unlocking something else on the wing. It feels like a lot easier of a magnet switch mid game because halfback is such an easier position to play. There's so many guys that can kind of go through there. Zach Williams can play it if we're desperate. There's plenty of things to have out there. You know, we saw Chera play off halfback. Not that we loved it, but if we were desperate for a magnet move, we can do it.
Yeah.
Who plays the wing would be the good question. I reckon it's Doherty would be my 100% guess.
I didn't even think to include him in that, in the like center square hierarchy earlier.
Well, I'll throw another question at you, maybe for like trying to figure out the depth chart and who gets in. If everyone's healthy, we're playing a game tomorrow.
Yeah.
Ollie Hollands to halfback over Boyd probably allows Doherty a nailed-on spot in this team, because I personally struggle to find a spot for Doherty, everyone healthy. Would you prefer Hollands halfback, Doherty wing, no Boyd? Or would you prefer Hollands wing, Boyd halfback, no Doherty?
Yeah, I'd say the first scenario.
Yeah, same. So I think that's kind of where I get positive around this. It gets Doc into the team.
Exactly. Like when I was thinking of Bins in Doherty's spot in that scenario, and I think it would have been Boyd and Hollands. But
what about Cottrell? Is that someone that you see high on that board?
He was the other name. Like, I think I've got him as my sub in my best 23 right now. His role is really up in the air for mine.
I'm just thinking then there's even another possibility where, because we've obviously got Cripps, we've got Hewitt, we've got Chera, Jagga Smith, Cooper Lord all run through there. Does this allow Walshy to spend more time on that wing and unlock something out there that we've seen some of his best footy be that split?
Yeah.
Again, I think there's enough guys that can maybe run through that wing. It just depends whether Hollands is seen as better than a guy like Boyd.
Yeah. No, agree. I'm very open to that as well.
Yeah. It's interesting. I'm excited to see it actually happen, and maybe it is just something they're trialing now, and by the time the season starts, he's back on the wing. Let's not worry about it, but we can pull that lever if we need to. Let us know your thoughts, though. What do you think of Brodie Kemp as a forward, Silvagni as the defender, Ollie Hollands as a halfback? At least we're trying something, which is always a positive. If we rolled every single thing back last year, made no list changes, didn't try anything, we're probably not improving. So at least there is some magnets being moved around. The last thing that we will end on, Lockie, I want to tie this in to where we'll start early next season. I want your sort of way too early prediction. You're way too early. This is the key talking point we're going to say next year, or maybe just a play to look out for. Give me some sort of fun hot take that we can rattle this episode off as we wrap up 2024.
I know we've harped on about how the hot takes have gotten less fun the better we've gotten. It's such a more fun segment when we're dog shit. So it's a bit less fun. When I think about this group and try and think of something hot, and maybe this isn't hot in the Carlton community, but it's TDK for me.
I like that. That's good. I did not think about that at all.
It just feels like the path for him to being the best ruckman in the league is there. If he can stay healthy and take it, like with the support that he'll have there, this is his time.
No, I love that. I think we've often said, like, what's the point of difference in the midfield? You know, and is that maybe Jagga Smith bringing it in? I think we kind of saw in the elimination final that it's kind of deconing. He makes a midfield that is maybe not as dynamic as others. Dynamic because he brings something different, and no ruck in the competition, or not many of them, do that. Not many of them are
No.
another midfielder that rove their own tap and can go forward and kick goals, win their own clearances. Only the top ruckman in the competition do that. So for that to be our point of difference, if he can stay healthy for those couple of games, that month of football, he was the best player in the competition, not only just the best best player. That's wild. I love that as a hot take because it's maybe similar to mine as like a player to look out for in one that we just don't talk about a lot because Ollie Hollands off halfback excites me, but that's not it. Motlop, Moya, Cowan, even Chera. These are the obvious ones that everyone's talking about. Not enough people are talking about Elijah Hollands. And maybe it's just too simple a take, but he did not play in the first season for Gold Coast due to injury. He then went on to play 5 games. Then in the next season, 9 games. That's 14 games of AFL footy before he came to Carlton. He came over to us clearly lacking the conditioning. He ends up playing 22 games for us. He only missed the first 2 games through the suspension. Otherwise, he would have played every single game last year. And he made a massive impact when he joined us. Maybe tailed off a little bit at the end of the year, which you can probably, you can't blame him when you know there was that lack of conditioning, lack of AFL football behind him. To a degree, he was kind of a first-year player when he came to us, particularly experience level. I think his footy smarts, his footy IQ, the way he just gets in the right spots every single time, particularly floating forward. All of a sudden, no one's on him. He takes the mark, kicks the goal. Being that mid-forward link, I think that's so important to our success. We haven't had it. Been crying out for someone to play that role. 17 goals from 22 games last year, I think is unbelievable. I just see him as someone that's not getting spoken about enough, as finally getting that taste of AFL footy, get another preseason under the belt, that cliche we like to talk about. The fact he finished 5th in the 2K time trial is not something I thought he had the capacity to do. I wasn't sure he was that kind of athletic beast. That's really impressed me, and I think he can add more layers to his game clearly, only really playing 1 season of footy. He can add a lot more layers to our team by the way he plays. 2025, that's my hot take that, wow, we're going to forget about him because he's no longer the shiny toy. And then we're going to sit here at the end of next season and be like, wow, he's one of our most important players for what he brings.
Clip it. I love it. Yeah, I would be very, very happy with that. He's already one of my favorites. And I see the path for him too.
It's good. Lockie, it's good. Let us know your hot takes already because who knows? It's going to be hard for this to be our last episode of the year and maybe wait until mid-late Jan before we start recording again because I'm itching to already start the content, start the best 22, start doing everything. So while we are taking this short little break, the little sabbatical, if you're watching on YouTube, drop in the comments the kind of off-season content that you're going to want in the preseason, what you want from us, or maybe what you don't want. Segments you haven't liked from us. We're all for the constructive criticism, the constructive feedback. We want to make this show bigger and better in 2025. Whatever you guys like, we'd love to hear so we can continue it. And if there isn't any content that we are doing that you want, there's only one way to make it happen. Let us know. And if you're listening in audio form, head over to the socials at Navy Blue Corner, tweet at us, sling us a DM. We're more than happy to chat. But that is going to wrap up the 2024 season. Another roller coaster as the Carlton Football Club. It's crazy how it happens. But 2025 is going to be a massive, massive year. I can't wait. Up the bloody baggers. See you guys next time.